It started as a picture-perfect family vacation, sunny skies, laughter, and the open road. But what should have been a memorable getaway quickly took a shocking turn. As the family pulled into a small-town gas station, flashing lights and sirens surrounded them. Local cops, stern and suspicious, demanded everyone step out of the car. The father, calm yet puzzled, complied, while his wife and kids watched in disbelief. What the officers didn't realize, though, was they weren't just dealing with any family. The man they were detaining wasn't your average dad. He worked for the FBI. As the cuffs tightened and tensions rose, he knew he had to stay quiet and play along, for now. What could have triggered this unexpected arrest? And how would the truth unravel? Stay tuned to uncover the whole story. As the officer questioned him, the father remained silent, his mind racing. The small town they were passing through wasn't known for much, just quiet streets and close-knit neighbors. But something didn't feel right. The cops seemed unusually tense, their eyes darting between him and his family, as if they knew more than they let on. His wife whispered, "What's going on?" But he only gave her a reassuring glance. He had to stay calm. Whatever this was, it was bigger than just a random stop. The officers mentioned something about a suspect fitting his description in a nearby area, but there was no way his family could be involved. He left his work behind for this trip, never expecting to get caught up in something like this. What did they know? And more importantly, why was his name being dragged into this? The father felt a knot tightening in his stomach as the officers continued to probe. Every word they said felt deliberate, like they were testing him, waiting for him to slip. They kept asking about his job, his whereabouts, as if the answers didn't line up with what they expected. His mind couldn't help but wander back to the briefing he had gotten before leaving the FBI office. There had been a threat, a shadowy figure on the loose, and a possible leak within the agency. Could this be connected? His wife, growing more anxious, started to speak up, but he subtly shook his head. He didn't want to drag them into this, not yet. Meanwhile, their kids sat in the car, unaware of the escalating situation. It felt like the world was closing in, and his every move was being scrutinized. The officer's murmurs grew louder, mentioning something about a nearby warehouse, a place he knew all too well. It was a site of a recent investigation he was part of, but how could they know that? He hadn't mentioned his work to anyone on this trip. Something wasn't adding up. Was it coincidence? Or had someone on the inside tipped them off? He couldn't shake the feeling that this was no random encounter. It felt like they were waiting for him to make a move. But what was their end game? The air around them felt thick with tension, the weight of the unknown pressing on the family. As the minutes dragged on, the officers exchanged glances, clearly unsettled. The father could tell they were starting to question their own instincts, but the situation was spiraling. One officer, a younger man with shaky hands, stepped closer, his voice low. "We know you're involved. Don't try to deny it." His heart skipped a beat. The words hit harder than anything he'd expected. He had to think quickly. His family was in danger, and no one, not even the officers, knew who they were really dealing with. He needed to make them see he wasn't the man they thought he was. Just then, the sound of screeching tires echoed in the distance. The father's eyes widened. Were they really this close to a confrontation? He could feel the grip of panic creeping up his spine, but he couldn't show it. The officers were on edge, their hands hovering near their weapons. Every second felt like a countdown. His wife, noticing the shift in the air, whispered again, "What's happening?" The father's voice was steady as he replied, "Just trust me. I'll handle this." Then in a flash, everything changed. The distant sirens grew louder, and in that split second, a new voice cut through the chaos, a voice the father knew all too well. A shadow stepped forward from behind the officers, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, the father felt a flicker of hope. But that hope quickly dimmed as the new arrival spoke the one word he never thought he'd hear in a situation like this. The word that would make everything he'd just endured seem like a mere prelude to a much darker reality. The shadowy figure stepped forward, his silhouette barely visible in the dimming light. The father's heart pounded as the man's voice broke the tense silence. "FBI Special Agent Carter," he said, his tone chilling. But the father wasn't relieved, not even close. He knew Agent Carter. They had crossed paths on a few high-stakes cases, but never like this. Carter wasn't supposed to be here, and the words he spoke next sent a cold shiver down the father's spine. "I'm afraid you're under arrest too, Agent." The father's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't happening. There had to be some mistake, some misunderstanding. But as he looked into Carter's eyes, he saw something he hadn't expected. Doubt, but also a deep resolve. It was clear that Carter wasn't there by accident. He wasn't just a bystander to this mess. He was a part of it. The officers, now caught between two FBI agents, seemed unsure of what to do next. One glanced nervously at Carter, while the other focused intently on the father, as if waiting for an explanation that wasn't coming. Then Carter spoke again, this time with a dark undertone. "You've been compromised, Agent. There's no way out of this now." The father's mind raced. Compromised? What did Carter mean? His eyes darted to his family, still sitting in the car, unaware of the full gravity of the situation. Had something gone horribly wrong? And why hadn't he seen this coming? The tension was palpable, and just as he opened his mouth to respond, a second, more disturbing sound filled the air. An unfamiliar voice over a loudspeaker, commanding everyone to stand down. This voice was not from the officers. It was from someone with even greater authority. Someone who knew far more than they were letting on. The father's instincts flared. Things were escalating too quickly. Too many people involved. But who was really in control? The loudspeaker crackled again, and this time the voice was unmistakably authoritative, cold, and demanding. "Agent Carter, stand down. You're out of your depth." The father's eyes narrowed, every instinct telling him this was the moment everything would either fall apart or be salvaged. Carter's expression tightened as he slowly turned his head toward the speakers. For a brief moment, his composure faltered, revealing a crack in his icy demeanor. It was enough to confirm the father's worst fear. Someone had been pulling the strings from the shadows. Carter wasn't just a bystander in this game. He was part of the same dangerous web the father had been caught in. Before he could process the enormity of this revelation, the officer who had been standing nearest to the car stepped forward, his hand trembling on his weapon. He was sweating, his face pale. He looked to Carter and then to the father, clearly unsure who to follow. Carter's eyes flicked toward the officer, and with a curt nod, he gave the signal. "Everyone, get back," Carter ordered, his voice laced with urgency. The father took a deep breath, realizing the game was far from over. The truth was even darker than he'd imagined. His heart raced, knowing this wasn't about a simple misunderstanding anymore. It was a carefully orchestrated trap. Whoever was behind this had been tracking him for longer than he'd realized, using his own identity to pull him into a much larger conspiracy. And then, in a moment of terrifying clarity, the father saw the true extent of the game. Carter wasn't just some agent trying to arrest him. He had been playing a double game all along. He had set him up, making him believe the threat was external when the true danger had been sitting right under his nose. The father's worst fears were realized as he heard the unmistakable hum of a helicopter overhead, its silhouette cutting across the twilight sky. The officer who had been so hesitant suddenly pulled his gun. He aimed it squarely at the father, his hands shaking. "You're coming with us," the officer growled. But just as the father steeled himself for the worst, the unexpected happened. Another vehicle, this one black and sleek, screeched to a halt beside them. The doors opened, and two more agents stepped out, their eyes locked on Carter. "It's over," one of them said with quiet authority. "The agency's pulling you in." Carter's face drained of color. The father could see the moment Carter realized he had been double-crossed. As the agents took Carter into custody, the father's mind was still reeling. Had he been a pawn in a game far bigger than he could have imagined? As the sun finally set, the father looked at his family. The ordeal wasn't over, but at least for now, they were safe. However, deep down, he knew the twists were far from finished. The final shocking revelation was still waiting for him, and it had only just begun. As the chaos settled and Carter was driven away in handcuffs, the father finally breathed a sigh of relief. He turned to his family, his heart heavy with the knowledge of how close they had come to disaster. His wife held his gaze, both of them understanding that their lives would never be the same. The world they had known, even within the FBI, was full of hidden dangers, threats they never saw coming. The officers who had arrested him were soon replaced by agents from his own agency, assuring him that the conspiracy within the FBI had been exposed. Carter's betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. As the family drove away, the father's mind raced, knowing that this was only the beginning. But for now, they were safe, and that was enough. The road ahead would be uncertain, but he would protect his family no matter what.